Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Lynn Hayes, and in today's video we'll be talking about the astrology for the week of November 30th, 2020. This video will include some talk about the upcoming eclipse season, which I feel is going to be very significant. It's going to lead us into the conjunction between Jupiter and Saturn in Aquarius, which is going to come up around the time of the winter solstice. Now, just to catch you up on some things from last week, we had Neptune turning direct. It had been retrograde for the last 6 months or so. And so Neptune is pretty stationary in the sky. It hasn't moved much for at least the last couple of months, and it will be fairly stationary for the next month or so as it starts to pick up speed. So Neptune, remember, is the planet of imagination and creativity and spirituality. It helps us to break out of any kind of rut that we find ourselves in. But Neptune can also create some illusion and confusion. And right now, Neptune is in a challenging square aspect to the lunar nodes of fate. So we'll be talking about the nodes today because they're important in the chart of an eclipse. The lunar nodes are the points where the path of the moon crosses the path of the sun, and we have the descending or the south node and the ascending or the north node. The south node being the point that we came from, the north node being the point where we're going. So there is a sense of fate. And this is not predestination, in my opinion. Of course, many people have different opinions about this. But in my view, there are certain things that we come in with that are fated. We can't change our birth chart. We can't change our family. We can stop seeing our families. We can take on new families, but we can't change the fact that we came from those families. We can't change the fact of our past, but we can create a future. And that's where fate, I feel, is different from destiny. I see the nodes of the moon as being more kind of a path to our destiny. In the natal chart, the south node shows what we've come in with that's familiar, that maybe is comfortable but holds us back. Then the north node, always the polar opposite, draws us more towards the future, more towards really personal evolution. In the chart of an eclipse, whether it's a lunar eclipse at the full moon or a solar eclipse at the new moon, the nodes of the moon are always very prominent. Either the north node or the south node will be conjunct the sun. We're heading into a new eclipse season. Eclipse seasons happen every 6 months. Sometimes the sun is aligned with the north node. Sometimes the sun is aligned with the south node. For example, the lunar eclipse, which occurs very early on November 30th in the morning, Eastern time, is a lunar eclipse, and the sun in Sagittarius is conjunct the south node of the past. Meanwhile, the moon in Gemini is conjunct the north node of the future. So the Gemini moon, which is very curious, very open-minded, ready to embrace all possibilities, conjunct the north node, shows that that's a doorway for us to bring something into culmination. This is the full moon, after all. It's the culmination of the lunar cycle. After the full moon, we start to have the waning cycle of the moon. And so right now we're at the fulfillment. The moon is in Gemini. It's conjunct the north node, which is also in Gemini, which shows us that the pathway to the future is by embracing a wide range of possibilities. At the south node and the sun, we have the sign of Sagittarius. And this is not a value judgment, but in Sagittarius, we have rigidly held beliefs. We have ideas that give our life meaning, and those things are very important. But Gemini is more open-minded, and for our purposes today in this eclipse, that is the element that's going to help us to move forward and not backwards. So this is a time to let go of preconceived ideas. There might be something in your life that needs to fall away, something new that's coming. When we have an eclipse, there's often an awakening of some kind. So often in our life, we are kind of sleepwalking through it. And we do things out of habit. We don't really always think about everything that we're doing. So when we have an eclipse, there's some sort of a wake-up call. The light of the moon is eclipsed from the shadow cast by the sun. So there's a sense of illumination as the moon's instincts are hidden. and a sense that while those instincts are hidden, something can be awakened. That is the energy of this eclipse that's coming up on November 30th. This is the first of a pair of eclipses, and the second one is a solar eclipse on December 14th. I've talked about that a little bit because it does fall on President Trump's natal eclipse. Now, I did look back, and there was another eclipse that was also right on at the same degree as his natal eclipse that occurred in 2001 in December. Of course, that was right after September 11th. He was living in New York at that time, and he was quite vocal about some of his ideas. But I couldn't really find anything super significant that happened at that time. But because this eclipse falls on the day that the Electoral College meet to vote, I think there could be some sort of an ending of the whole election process. I know that not everybody agrees on the election, and so please don't leave nasty comments for me. I would really appreciate that. But in the meantime, we are in a cycle of change. And that takes me to the next thing I'd like to talk about, which is the upcoming conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn and Aquarius. I'm just going to leave a little teaser right now. I'm going to probably do a whole separate video on that. But for now, the conjunction is really beginning to form. The two planets, Jupiter and Saturn, are pretty close together. And in fact, Pallas Athena, which is the asteroid of divine wisdom, there's sort of a sense of awakening with Pallas and strength and victory. Pallas is moving into Aquarius on December 7th. So Pallas is going to pave the way as these two planets move into Aquarius. Just very briefly, I want to just give you a little tidbit about the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. Jupiter and Saturn are the two outermost, what we call personal planets. They mark the edge of the visible solar system and the planetary pantheon that's been used for thousands of years by astrologers. Jupiter represents the expansive principle. Saturn represents a contracting principle of hard work and discipline and achievement. When these two planets align in the sky, which they do every 20 years, there's often a contraction. If you track back, and it's kind of convenient because every 20 years is right on an even number. So we have the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction of 2020. We had one in the year 2000, the dot-com bubble. We had one in the year 1980 and 1960. So we can go back. But what's significant about this cycle and why it is sometimes called the Great Chronocritor or the Great Timing Tool is that every 400 years or so, the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction will shift into a new element. There's a little bit of back and forth. It's not like a clean transition, but we are just coming out of 400 years of Earth, and now we are moving into the next cycle, which is air. Over this last year, we've had a big lineup of planets in Capricorn, which you'll know if you have followed astrology at all. We had Pluto, of course, went into Capricorn in 2008. We had Saturn going into Capricorn in 2019. Then we had Jupiter going into Capricorn at the end of 2019, and they all converged in Capricorn in the first quarter of this year. Actually, last spring and summer, Saturn and Pluto were within about 3 degrees of a conjunction. And we started to see some compression and we started to see some worry out in the world. But what's happened this year with the virus, and it's difficult to talk about this without getting political. My personal belief is that the level of fear and obsession has really been out of control. And I blame that on the Saturn-Pluto conjunction in Capricorn and also Jupiter in there kind of expanding that fear. And the more fear and contraction and oppression there is, the more of a reaction there will be. Like if you have a child, the more you try to limit what they do, the more they're going to rebel against that. We are about to move out of this Capricornian period into a period of Aquarius. A lot of people think that Aquarius is all sunshine and light, thanks to the musical Hair back in the 60s, which talked about this great age of enlightenment. And there certainly is a factor of that with Aquarius, but if you look at it only in that light, you really miss the bigger picture. Saturn is the ruler of both Capricorn and Aquarius. So it's not like Capricorn is all hard work and discipline and restriction, and then Aquarius is all brilliant and light and let's just have a party, because we're still ruled by Saturn. Saturn is still about science, and it's still, it's very much now about contact tracing and how technology is going to help society, because Aquarius is also very concerned with the limits of society. How much can we be controlled? Where does freedom need to happen? A good example of Aquarius is the French Revolution. So the French Revolution occurred under the influence of Aquarius, and we had this, incredible radical rebellion of the peasants against the nobles. But then there was a very dark period where many people were killed and murdered and, in the name of the state and in the name of the revolution. In astrology, nothing is really good and nothing is really bad. Everything kind of just is, and everything is designed to pull humanity towards greater enlightenment. And we can certainly find that under the influence of Aquarius, but first we have to have our eyes open. My personal belief is that under this influence of Aquarius, and not to get too detailed about it right now, but we have the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in Aquarius. Next year, Saturn and Aquarius will square Uranus, which is the modern ruler of Aquarius. And so there's likely to be, over the next year or year and a half, quite a bit of social change, quite a bit of rule setting and rule breaking and remaking the rules. So anyway, that's just kind of a brief tidbit of what we have to come. But let's get back to next week. So Mercury has been in Scorpio for the last few weeks, and Mercury is about to go into Sagittarius on December 1st. Mercury in Scorpio has been very intense, and this affects all of us to some extent. The sign that Mercury is in colors the way human communication takes place. It doesn't really matter what your sign is, but for all of us, communication has been more intense. Mercury moving into Sagittarius is likely going to bring kind of a lift, an expansiveness, more of an interest in how people see the world. I think it's probably going to help the current political situation. Things are not just difficult in the United States, they are difficult all around the world, and governments are trying to figure out how to handle the virus situation. Apparently on YouTube, you're not supposed to say the word of the virus, so people are calling it the thing that shall not be named and other things so that the algorithms don't pick up anything. But in any case, this is a worldwide situation, and governments are having to figure out how to keep their communities safe, and citizens are trying to figure out how much control they can live with. These are very Aquarian themes, especially as we leave the sign of Capricorn for Aquarius. So with Mercury moving into Sagittarius, there's a little more openness. There's not so much of a need to win. There's more of an ability to see kind of long range with some optimism. So now let's talk about the week ahead. We start the week with the moon in the sign of Gemini, and at 4:29 a.m. Eastern Time, we have the lunar eclipse at the full moon. The influence of an eclipse takes a while to build. Some people say that the influence lasts for 6 months on either side. I've heard 6 weeks on either side. Personally, I think that all of that, just observationally, all of those ideas is way too long. But an eclipse is likely to last for at least as long as a regular lunation, which usually takes about 3 days to build and about 3 days to wane, will occur. And the moon will already be in Gemini. But this energy of the eclipse is likely to last for the first few days of the week. The chart of the eclipse incorporates some of the aspects that I've been talking about, such as the square of Neptune to the lunar nodes. That's embedded in the chart of the eclipse. I wrote a detailed article about the eclipse, and I'll put a link to that in the description box, so you'll be able to check that out if you're interested. On Tuesday morning Eastern Time, the moon will line up with the North Node, which completes the energy of the eclipse. At the time of the eclipse, the moon and the lunar node are about 11 degrees apart. Astronomers give an eclipse about 15 to 17 degrees of orb for the nodes to be apart from the sun and moon. Astrologically, that's a little bit far. The closer the nodes of destiny, if you will, are to the sun and the moon, the more intense the experience is from an astrological perspective. So at the actual full moon, which is the eclipse, the moon is about 11 degrees from the nodes. And then as the moon continues to move through Gemini, it will, on the morning of Tuesday the 1st, line up with the North Node. That, I feel, is going to be a continuation of the intensity of this eclipse. So watch for this time. It's not only Monday, but also early Tuesday morning. There is still this sense of kind of awakening, unmasking, something shifting. Also on December 1st, Mercury moves into Sagittarius, which I've already talked about. And then later that evening at 10:32 p.m. Eastern Time, the moon moves into Cancer. Remember, every time the moon goes into a cardinal sign, which is either Cancer, Capricorn, Libra, or Aries, it will eventually bump up against Chiron in Aries, Mars in Aries, and the 3 planets in Capricorn. So with the moon moving into Cancer, which is its own sign, our feelings are deeper. We are more in touch with them. We're more connected to our feelings and our emotions, our desire to care and nurture. You know, with Cancer, there's love coming in and there's love going out. There's this sort of cycle of feeling and openness and a big, open, soft heart. That's not always easy for a lot of people, and quite often with Cancerian types, we have people that are very shy or fearful of connecting. And so when the moon goes into Cancer, if we're people that aren't really that comfortable with our emotions, it can be a little bit difficult. On Wednesday, December 2nd, for example, the Cancer moon will move into alignment to square Chiron, which is in Aries. When the moon is in a square to Chiron in Aries, which it will be that morning, everybody's feelings are a little bit more raw. So it's a good time to be careful of the feelings of others. That could be a little challenging because we just came off of an eclipse. The lunar eclipse can be a big trigger of emotions. You know, we're awakened to something, we feel suddenly much more intensely about things. Tuesday morning could be a little bit challenging. Fortunately, though, is in a trine to Ceres, which is in Pisces. Ceres is the planet that deals with our relationship to our body, how we feel about being in a body, how we feel about being incarnated. With Ceres in Pisces, the Piscean experience is very important for our own inner integration, you know, the integration between the body, the mind, and the spirit. Ceres is very connected with the idea of self-care, which has become a little bit trite, but that doesn't mean it's not important. It still is very important. And the Cancer moon harmonizing with Ceres and Pisces can really help us, especially with the square to Chiron. Chiron squares can be challenging, they can be uncomfortable, but they can always facilitate release of any old emotions that might be stuck. Then very early in the morning on Thursday, December 3rd, we have a lovely harmonious trine from the Cancer moon to Venus in Scorpio. And that happens at about 2:42 a.m. Eastern Time. But it's a wonderful time whenever the moon harmonizes with Venus. It's just a beautiful time of creativity and good feeling and an open heart and love and affection. And even if you're not awake for it, it does set a little bit of a stage of harmony, which is going to be very helpful because then the Cancer moon will square Mars a little later in the morning Eastern Time. Now, the Cancer moon is so sensitive. You know, if you think about the crab with the soft shell that some people enjoy eating, and then the crab over time develops that hard shell of resistance. So when the highly sensitive moon is in a challenging square to Mars, which is in Aries right now still, and is forceful and is dynamic and is aggressive and assertive, that can be a little bit destabilizing. You know, we've just come from a place where the heart is more open we're feeling more vulnerable, and then here comes Mars. So watch for that, especially if you tend to be a rather sensitive person. This could be something that might be a little more difficult. And that's on Thursday, late morning, like 8 to 10-ish, maybe 11 Eastern time. The square from the moon to Mars will be followed by a series of squares to the Capricorn planets. So the moon will first square Pluto later in the day on Thursday. When the Cancer moon is in a square to Pluto, Pluto is the planet of intensity and dramatic transformation, endings, new beginnings, passions, deep psychological upheaval. And that peaks around 7:20 Eastern time on Thursday. You'll probably start picking that up around midday Eastern time Thursday, and it will continue to linger because when it squares Pluto, it's very close to the square to Jupiter and then to Saturn as well. But that whole day has a lot of lunar aspects, and there's a likelihood of heightened moods and emotions and more changeabilities. At 7:52 a.m. on Friday, the moon is going to leave sensitive Cancer for Leo. When the moon moves into Leo, we tend to feel much more comfortable in our own selves. Leo is the sign of self-expression. It's a sign of self-glorification, if you will. It has to do with expressing the self and being admired for the things we can do. Honoring ourselves, of course, on a very deep level. Also on Friday, December 4th, we have the Leo moon harmonizing in a grand trine with Mercury, which is in Sagittarius, and Chiron, which is in Aries. The trine from Mercury to Chiron lasts all day. That's a Mercury transit, which usually lasts for a day or two. That's going to start on Friday, and it's going to move into Saturday. We have the trine from Mercury and Sagittarius, which is very forward-thinking, optimistic, more social, and a harmonious trine to Chiron, which is all about healing. It's about mentorship. It's about teaching. It's about fixing problems and coming to terms with things that might be bothering us. So that's a lovely time of just kind of readjustment. And then when the moon gets involved in this grand trine, that's just a wonderful day of optimism and happiness. These very positive influences, we don't necessarily, it's not like, oh, it's 4 o'clock, suddenly I'm happy, because we don't really notice. If you've been feeling down, try to remember that this is happening, because then you might be more awakened to the reality of it. Like, it's a beautiful day outside today, but if I stayed inside in my house all day and watched television, I would never notice it. It doesn't matter how beautiful it is. It's kind of like that with the planetary aspects. That's why I really like to tell you about all the aspects that come up in the week. The difficult ones we need to know about so we can watch out for them, but the harmonious ones we also need to know about so that we can take advantage of them and enjoy them. And Friday is one of those days. On Saturday, December 5th, we have the waning influence of that lovely grand trine. And then there's a beautiful harmonious trine from Venus to Neptune. That continues this positive feeling from the day before. Venus and Neptune are related. I look at Neptune as being the higher octave of Venus. With Venus, we're dealing with interpersonal relationships and love. Neptune is an outer planet, and it inspires compassion, divine love, bliss, a connection to the divine within ourselves. And again, this lasts for just a day or two, and it culminates late in the evening on Saturday. It's going to be building all throughout Saturday and then waning on Sunday. That's a wonderful time for creativity. It's a beautiful time for relationships, for spending time with people that you love. Venus is in Scorpio, where we feel very deeply, or we want to feel very deeply connected. We don't want anything superficial. So we have this deeply connecting Venus and harmonizing with Neptune. It's just wonderful for creativity or anything involving imagination, doing yoga, meditation. Just a beautiful day, especially because that morning the Leo moon aligns in a harmonious trine with the Sagittarius sun. When the moon, which is our inner world, harmonizes with the sun, which is our conscious self, it's a wonderful integration. and that trine occurs around 9:30, 10 o'clock in the morning on Saturday. There's a square from the moon to Venus later in the day on Saturday, but I really feel that because of all of the positive, expansive energy, I'm really not very concerned about that for you. Venus is in Scorpio, where it does get pretty intense, and the moon is in Leo, which is more about kind of me, right? So there might be a little bit of conflict, perhaps, very subtle, between, wait, but I wanted to do this. Oh, but I also want to be connected to this person. But the energy for those 2 days is so overwhelmingly positive. Like I said, I'm not really so worried about that, and you shouldn't be either. At 2:46 p.m., the moon is going to move into Virgo. And many of you know I really love the moon in Virgo. I love to be organized. I like to think about things in order. And when the moon goes into Virgo, we do tend to find it easier to make sense of all of the different aspects of our life. Virgo is an earth sign. It has to do with our day-to-day routines. So Sunday afternoon, when the moon moves into Virgo, might be a good time to start thinking about maybe a morning routine or an evening routine or some sort of routine that's going to put a little more shape into your life and help you to do the things that you really but haven't been able to find a box to put them in your life. And that takes us to Monday, when we'll have a new video. So I'm really grateful always for your comments and your messages and your emails. But in any case, if you have any questions or comments, please leave them for me, and I'll look forward to seeing you next week.